Greetings, I'm Saniel and welcome to Session 5, my presentation on the teaching, the fifth gateway in the White Hot Yoga of the Heart, our 12 mysterious gateways to advanced evolutionary emergence. This is a really important session today. I guess all of them are. I've got a lot to cover, and I can only take about an hour this morning. So I want to do a relatively brief gazing with you and jump right on in. So let's settle in for just a moment or so. Okay. Gateway number 5, the second in second triad, 3 treasures of the life, the adept, the teaching, the community. So this is the teaching. Its formative and ongoing evolutionary importance for all practitioners and realizers in our way. So I'll read through our 7 key points here, and then begin commenting, and I've got some things to read from my written teachings that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Never done this in the context of a video communication before. By the way, I want to recommend to everyone if you may have a preferred medium, audio, video, print, that works best for you in terms of taking in the teachings. And my transmission, however it comes through for you in each medium. My recommendation to you is, as and when you can make the time for it, expose yourself to the other media as well. This will give your whole being, whole body, the best opportunity to really imbibe the teachings, and we'll be talking more about that as we go today. So, here are the bullet points, or the key points rather. As the first significantly post-hypermasculine or post-spirit matter split teaching that has come forward, the total teaching of the White Hot Yoga of the Heart, which includes the fundamental principles of waking down, is an original revelation. The discernment necessary to the White Hot Yoga of the Heart cannot come into play without disciplined cultivation of true intellect. Such discriminative intelligence can only be formed through intensive, serious study of this way's unique wisdom. Because the stages of this evolutionary journey continue throughout one's life, attention to this wisdom, which includes original orientations to death and dying, can potentially benefit practitioners at any point along the path. This teaching is not merely made of concepts. It is itself living transmission of the siddhi, or accomplishing, activating, awakening, and transforming power of the white-hot heart. Just as the basic practice of listening always calls us to listen first and foremost to ourselves, so optimal attention to the teaching of this yoga throughout our lives depends on prior attention to the movements and prompts of our own bodies, minds, and hearts. Thus, cherishing, honoring, and protecting this teaching as a treasure, and supporting its movement into the world, includes, whenever necessary, the green lighting of doubt, confusion, mistrust, and serious skeptical questioning, even of this teaching itself. Similarly, our approach encourages participants to express their own articulations of the nature of life and how to live, but only on the basis of having already deeply grasped the original teaching of the white-hot yoga of the heart. Get it first, then go beyond it. Or, commenting immediately on that very last line there, get it first, then go beyond it. As I wrote in my teaching in the White-Hot Yoga of the Heart book, the deep meaning of that, the old adage that a lot of people like to use as a good rationalization for not listening to any adept's teaching, is when you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And my essay in the book says, well, first you've got to make sure to meet the Buddha on the road. So that meeting includes, optimally, from my perspective and for most people, I do make room for people to live all this out as they will. But especially after, whatever it is now, 22 plus years of my awakened life, all of which I've been engaged in teaching in some fashion. It was about a half a year later that I formally hung up my shingle and dared to step forward as an awakened teacher. Through all this time, it's become very obvious to me that attention to the teachings is extremely important. Regarding the teaching of the adept as a treasure is extremely important. Now let's say my dreams have been realized and you're watching, listening to, and or reading this presentation 200 years from now. And I will seem quaint and the technology will seem antiquated beyond even being able to speak about to you. And so much will have happened. So many adepts, either formally empowered as adept teacher transmitters of this white-hot yoga of the heart, or people who have benefited from this teaching and gone on to teach in their own way and are using their own language significantly, but have come through the lineage that, as a post-hypermasculine teaching, which is what I said in that first key point, I am the originator of. Perhaps all these other folks have also become great adept transmitters and great teachers of this living wisdom. I'm not proposing that mine or Linda Ma's and mine together in our time, this is 2015, best case scenario, I'll have another, 30 years of actually communicating pre-senility or whatever might overwhelm this organism and in effect make it obsolete. The body-mind person here as a living transmitter and teacher of all this. Even so, that's a pretty narrow window in human time. And others will come forward. And their teachings, as I'm suggesting here in this last key point, their teachings will be, and yours potentially someday will be, itself, in many ways, an original revelation. But this is a specific choice of words that I want to go into in a little bit of detail in this presentation. And before I do that, I want to read you from the book, The White Hot Yoga of the Heart, which, as you know, I've made some use of here. I was thinking about it this morning with both this book and also today I hope to get into, I'm not sure I will, but the follow-up text, The Incarnation of Mutuality. I was thinking this morning if those of us in my time, and Linda Ma and I can somehow arrange to have me do recitations of both of these whole books in this context, including commentaries. I expect if you are listening, watching, and or reading 200 years or more from now, or somewhere in that long time frame, many of you will be so glad that we did that. So glad that we made that possible. Right now it's not possible for me to devote my time, energy, and attention to that, and even if in other ways it were possible, that's not the most immediate thing I need to attend to for your benefit, especially, well, everyone's, but especially those of you to come a long time from now. Okay, so the first thing I want to say here, and the key points get into this, the next to the last key point, makes a very specific communication, where the whole discussion of these treasures is all about cherishing, honoring, and protecting them. The adept, or adepts, the teaching, the community, everyone participating, the teaching. And also the various cultural artifacts and vehicles that we develop over time. So, for instance, someday, hopefully still in my lifetime, we're going to acquire one or more sanctuaries for this work. And in such a manner that while I'm still alive and got some sap flowing through the stalks here, that I'll be able to do, with Linda Ma's help and that of many others of you, major work to properly install the transmission of the White Hot Heart in the places, the buildings, the land, the sanctified special sites. That's a whole other discussion. But cherishing, honoring, and protecting the treasures, as specially identified here, the adept, the teaching, and the community. And in this case, particularly the teaching and supporting its movement into the world includes, whenever necessary, the green lighting of doubt, confusion, mistrust, serious skeptical questioning, even of this teaching itself. That actually is how we get to deep belief or faith. And that's my first essay that I want to read here from the White Hot Yoga of the Heart. It's page 22 in this version. Test my words. True faith is confidence in being. I offer you a process which you may, and indeed if you choose it, must make uniquely your own, whereby you can realize the true and total heart of divinely human existence. In this way, you can become a spontaneous disseminator of the heart's healing and liberating power yourself. I wish you all success, and I support you in coming forward exactly as you are so moved, whether that be in the mode of teaching, such as what I'm doing here, or healing work, hands-on, or as an artist, as a scientist, as a politician, hopefully of the stateswoman caliber, as a mother, as a father, as a lover, as a friend, as a husband, as a wife. In all these ways, and specifically whatever ways are unique to you. That's what this is all about. Please listen, therefore, with open heartfelt receptivity and also with discriminating intelligence, as I attempt to distill the essence of this process. I do not ask you to believe my words, but only to listen and to discover if they ring true for you. Mental belief is bankrupt as a principle of esoteric spiritual growth and awakening. It only cloaks a deeper, yet unexamined and unrelieved state of doubt. In contrast, as my gurus taught, true faith awakens when the truth of the word of a realizer coincides with your intuition of the truth of your own existence. Such coincidence occurs only if and when you exercise your own discriminative intelligence, even your capacity for doubt and skepticism, to the degree that what you are listening to reveals itself simply and obviously, not only to be true in principle, but precisely to be true of you. And not just true in your mind and spirit, but true in your heart and your guts. Does such true faith or confidence in being awaken in you as you consider my words? If so, then I invite you to use my words and my simple human presence in the world as aids to your own divinely human self-realization and transformative further life in whatever ways are appropriate and harmoniously agreeable to us both. If you're listening after my lifetime and even long before, the agreeable part to me, I'm not going to have much say in that. But I hope if I were to hear that I would feel, yeah, right on. Good work. Thank you. Thank you. And including thank you for daring to do it in ways that I hadn't thought about and might not have recommended. And that's how I got here. I can hardly complain if you find your own way that Saniel wouldn't have chosen or recommended. So, I'm not going to read this whole next essay called Listening and the Magic of Ritual Repetition, but I will read a few pieces of it. Effective listening is an action of the whole person, and it becomes or translates itself into a form of realization. I urge you, therefore, to listen with your whole being. And I must suggest that what you are listening to does indeed carry the very awakening power of the heart of which it speaks. These words are mantric, infused with living current, born of and conveying the selfsame being force that they address and describe, which again goes back to and underlines one of the key points. This teaching is not merely made of concepts. It is itself living transmission of the siddhi, or accomplishing, activating, awakening, and transforming power of the white-hot heart. For this reason, in my work, and that of all teachers in the traditions of consciousness before me, and in this essay I'm speaking mostly of consciousness. This was written way back in 1995. I wouldn't tend to do that now. I would at least say, in the traditions of consciousness and conscious embodiment before me. It has long been understood that a certain amount of ritual repetition is necessary in order for listening to yield most directly to hearing or steady comprehension and awakening or transcendent realization. There is a kind of elixir or nectar associated with true teachings about the nature of consciousness or conscious embodiment, or waking down in mutuality, or the white-hot yoga of the heart. Those listening with real need thrive on these teachings. They continually feed upon them. Therefore, the communicators must shoulder the burden of providing such delicious revelations in abundant measure. People who are not ready for this stage of evolutionary growth do not, indeed cannot, appreciate this mantric repetition of liberating teaching. To them, it can even sound kind of boring and irrelevant. I've produced this teaching from the direct and effortless realization of consciousness, conscious embodiment, in mutuality. I repeat many of its most liberating and empowering concepts, images, phrases, and metaphors again and again, each time in a new way, from a different angle, in a fresh moment, knowing how the awakening magic works. In this sense, in the grand tradition of my gurus, I am like a ceremonial priest, making obeisances and offerings of all kinds, again and again, to you, capital Y. For those who are ready, my repetitive wavings of this light of wisdom consciousness and my innumerable offerings of my heart into the fire of your consideration will bring great liberating and healing help. If you approach, in this case, the reading of this book, in this case, the listening to, watching, or reading of this presentation and this whole virtual seminar as a sacred ceremony, you will thereby attune yourself most beneficially to what I am attempting to convey to you. And your listening will lead to profound self-initiation into the white-hot yoga of being, the white-hot yoga of the heart. Initiation, realization, expression, the whole display, your way, in your style. So, it's interesting in the timing of this virtual seminar, because the way it works is that I'm recording this presentation not quite 2 weeks before we have the conversation, and somewhere between 10 days to as little as a week before that conversation, so that you have time to watch, read, or listen, or listen. So it puts me in a curious kind of sequence where I'm working with one presentation after another, and in this case, the last conversation that took place was the conversation on session 3, activation, including transmission, education, and evocation. And I devoted actually in that conversation, we wound up talking most of the time, me responding to questions and comments, and I had some things to bring forward. But as I expect you're well aware, we spent a good deal of time on education specifically. And I'm glad we did, because I'm not going to repeat what I said there. That's very important, but if you haven't paid close attention to it, please do, if you want the fuller package of communication about the teaching. Here, part of what I want to do is go back into, I've commented on some of these key points already, but I want to go back into the first one, because it has two significant points. I can see a third that I want to at least mention. And these are formative. If you really get these, they're going to go a long way toward all of these other key points and this whole matter of how best to cherish, honor, and protect this teaching as a treasure for you, for the work, for the community, for all those to come, for all those presently hungry for what this white-hot yoga of the heart can provide them. So, I'll read it again. As the first significantly post-hypermasculine or post-spirit matter split teaching that has come forward, the total teaching of the white-hot yoga of the heart, which includes the fundamental principles of waking down, is an original revelation. And I mentioned already, these words, original revelation, are not ones that I use lightly. In my study of I didn't make a note of it. I know it's in here somewhere. I'm remembering just now a piece that I wrote about in the White Hot Yoga of the Heart. Maybe I'll pull it out and find it for... yes, here it is. Yes, originality. On my primary sources in my own offering. I'm not going to talk here about Ramana Maharshi and Adida, but I do want to talk about originality, and I'll say this. Each one who awakens fully into divinely human self-realization becomes an authentic original, one who lives from and as the very source of all life, all phenomena. In his or her psychophysical presence in the world, however, each such being is a product of and participant in forms of life and mind that appear in his or her particular time and place. Therefore, while living ab origine is from Latin meaning from the origin, from and as the true source, each such individual communicates in whatever manner is most natural to him or her. That natural manner in each case is significantly informed by the cultural influences that are part of his or her psychophysical conditioning and spiritual training. I suggest that my communication, including this book, is an original expression of the wisdom of our only true and total heart, the divine being and reality. I owe much to my primary sources, and I do acknowledge their contributions, as well as those of many others. But what I am communicating is not derivative. I have explored these matters and articulated these observations from my own realization of the great origin, the divine source nature of being. Wherever I feel that I am relying on to any substantial degree on the work of another, I say so. I must say, therefore, that the ultimate test of the originality of this expression is not whether anything like it has ever been said before been said. Rather, that ultimate test is whether it can help you consolidate, explore, realize, incarnate, and express your own original and total nature more fully than you might have thought possible. Then I say your derivative communications do not directly convey the awakening power of the heart. I'd edit that. Maybe they don't do it in the same way that the most fully original ones do. And these words, original and derivative, also they're not they're specific to the understanding of source teachings and teachings built on those source teachings since ancient times. I'm looking for this. Let's see if it's here. Maybe I make this point. White Light and Ashastriya Dharma, the path of breakthrough. I don't see the language I'm looking for, so we won't take time on that today. In the Indian yoga traditions, the language for original revelations is Shruti, the word. It's transliterated into English SR or SHRUTI. And what's the word for derivative teachings? Smriti, S-M-R-I-T-I. Shruti and Smriti. So to me, it's important for people to understand, not believe, remember, but to hear what I mean when I say this is an original breakthrough revelation. On one level, who cares? If it helps you awaken and realize, so what? Well, I'm not trying to get you or anybody else to, in effect, pin a medal on my chest. Oh, Saniel, you accomplished such a great thing. That's not the point. I mean, sure, I appreciate the recognition, but that's not the point. The point, as I said somewhere here, let me read you a few paragraphs. This is page 167 in this curious book, The Incarnation of Mutuality, which, as I've said, is kind of like the White Hot Yoga of the Heart on steroids in a lot of ways. These books are art forms. That's the best way I can. They're best understood as somebody's very innovative painting style or something like that. This is what I want to communicate here. The most radically innovative break with tradition here is not these teachings on the rot and the core wound, which I'm writing about in this particular section. It's my critique of the hypermasculine worldview. Of all the innovative breakthroughs in this teaching, and there are a number, the most radical and potentially world-shaking is my critique of hypermasculinity. Very few people understand why this is so, because few have made a thorough investigation of this critique. The worldview common to all hypermasculine culture, its inevitable fetishes of formulaic and superimposed seeking, its alternation between strategies of escape and domination in relation to all psychophysical phenomena, especially material ones. A fundamental insight into these things cannot help but dispose one to a life of white-hot mutual wakefulness. And then I talk about how I've written about this in my book, Waking Down, and that chapter, by the way, Chapter 7 in Waking Down, Beyond Hypermasculine Dharmas or Life Ways of Superimposed and Formulaic Seeking. If you really want to go into this, read that in Waking Down, and then get a copy of The Incarnation of Mutuality if you don't have one. There are a number of essays here where I quote from that chapter quite liberally because it says it quite well, although nowadays I would edit to some degree. But again, I say a little further down here, though many people have read Waking Down, very few, it appears to me, have actually burrowed into that particular chapter to the degree of really making it their own. So you see what I'm saying about the teaching here is if you don't understand what it means to be post-hypermasculine, for a teaching to be, and for people to be living in a manner that is post-hypermasculine. Or years later, after this book was published, I had already begun talking about the spirit-matter split, but only later did it dawn on me that I'm actually using the spirit-matter split as a synonym for post-hypermasculine, for hypermasculine dissociation. I mean the same things by those phrases. So perhaps spirit-matter split more readily communicates to you, but even so, it's important, like I say here, to burrow into these teachings to understand what makes this teaching such a treasure to protect. And again, why protect it? I mentioned in the next paragraph. This is unfortunate that very few people have actually burrowed into that chapter to the degree of really making it their own. Ingesting it, metabolizing it, making it your own wisdom. That's how to test my words. That's how to develop true faith, which is confidence in being and becoming. It's confidence in being as an evolutionary event, in your evolutionary event. That's the secret to this. I gather that for some people, this consideration may appear to be an overly intellectual, historical overlay compared to heart and gut stuff like the rot and the core wound, the wake down, shake down, broken zones, mutuality, listening to and hearing the other, meeting and being met. Who cares about the concepts? Well, from my perspective, however, a serious understanding of the hypermasculine worldview and way of living will have incalculable practical value to anyone who bothers to develop it. And then this next section, whatever it is, about 3 sentences, are all in italics. So I'm going to read them twice. Serious understanding of this hypermasculine worldview and way of living. What's the practical, incalculable practical value? It will save you time. It will help you cut through the endless red tape of your own potential searches. It will relieve you of illusions and misunderstandings about yourself and life altogether that might otherwise occupy you for years in all kinds of painful, protracted, and finally futile adventures. And this can be as true for you after your awakening, even long afterwards, as before. And I cross my heart. Not going to cross my heart. I don't hope to die. But I really mean it. I have to work to keep refining and deepening in the post-hypermasculine perspective, the post-spirit-matter split worldview. We are just at the bare beginning of that evolutionary potential coming forward into human consciousness, character, culture, potentially civilization. Just at the barest beginning. On this note, one of the few people, and I'm not saying this critically, I'm saying it as a pained observation. One of the few people teaching out in the greater world of people today who are leading the way, who really sniffs this, is a woman named Patricia Albert, who used to be a primary lieutenant of Werner Erhard way back in the days of Est, and who's now teaching mutual awakening through her evolutionary collective. And if you, her last name is Albere. If you Google her or evolutionary collective, you'll find these internet radio interviews that she's done with a variety of people, and she's done a couple with me specifically because one was not enough to really get into what is this hypermasculinity thing. And so we went into it very deeply, and I encourage you to listen because these two conversations took place, I think, both within the last 6 months or so. One quite recently from when I'm communicating this course, early 2015. Post-hypermasculine Dharma is just coming into the world. None of us are ripe in its embodiment, in ourselves or together, because it is, among other things, its realization of reality as intrinsically the paradox of self plus other. Selves, even internal multiple selves, plus multiple others who have their own multiple selves, who have the qualities of who they've been, the qualities of who they are now, the qualities of who they are becoming. So this, sorry, forgot to take my phone out of the room. I'm not going to redo this presentation. That should do it.
Hello, please leave a message after the tone.
Good, thank you. Technology gives us so much, trips us up so often. This teaching that I'm giving you, that now the Waking Down teachers are giving you in their way and to their degrees of congruence with mine. And I bless them to be uncongruent as their own hearts, their own beings evolve and unfold. Linda Ma, of course, especially with me because we are so congruent. And we are the ones who are embodying the white hot yoga of the heart forward into the world now. And, why is it so important? Exactly for the reasons that I wrote there in the incarnation of mutuality. This can be so, it can make your life so much more serene and efficient to understand these matters deeply. And it can also give you a far greater perspective, a far more inclusive perspective on what's happening in the heart of humanity, as the heart of humanity in our time and going forward. And that's something I want to devote some of the rest of our initial session here to presenting to you a little bit. So I think I've covered this matter of originality. This teaching fundamentally is not derivative. I had to pull it out of the heart of reality. It's a big deal, and that includes the fundamental principles of Waking Down. Study the teachings of Waking Down. You're going to hear from everybody who teaches it authentically a critique of the hypermasculine perspective. And many, many people, teachers, mentors, realizers in Waking Down, embody these principles beautifully and profoundly. And I honor that. I'm so grateful to them, or to you if you're one of them, for that. The White Hot Yoga of the Heart, as I've expressed, is a cultural context that includes and builds upon the Waking Down and mutuality principles as a primary foundation, and approaches them and then also continues to move forward in unique ways. And by the way, I want to make clear, one of the Waking Down teachers brought this to my attention recently, and it's important not only in my time, but also anyone listening whenever to this. At the present moment, the Waking Down Teachers Association formally has not instituted yet a whole lot of courses and developments of the evolutionary process that many people are living out well beyond the early years of the Wake Down Shakedown. And I'm not going to go into explaining that. Presumably you know what I'm talking about. So in any way that I may have communicated, or Linda Ma and I might have communicated, that Waking Down is limited to teaching about awakening, second birth, and the early years thereafter, the Wake Down, Shakedown, and so forth. That's inappropriate and misleading. It's not true. But right now, the ferment for that is happening through individual teachers exploring and experimenting. Not much has yet been built into the institutional work of Waking Down that addresses the long haul of the living of a life beyond awakening in this matter. So this is, again, an important clarification with respect to what the white hot yoga of the heart is. We will develop many practices, already are starting to, that aren't necessarily built into the general Waking Down format and shouldn't be. That's part of what the beauty is of being able to grow and evolve and have different offerings made available for different people. So, what we mean by post-hypermasculine is crucial. And as I just said here, the stages of this evolutionary journey continue throughout one's life. Therefore, attention to this wisdom, which includes teachings about death and dying, can potentially benefit practitioners at any point along the path, not only chronologically in your life, I was starting to say their lives, but also developmentally. There's so much room for developmental enrichment, for, as a matter of fact, very definitely improving, refining, tempering, clarifying your presence and participation as a human character. Not only refining your integrity and authenticity, but your skills in all kinds of arenas. And this is all part of the potential of the white hot yoga of the heart as we go and as we grow. So I think I've addressed most of these other key points in my time left. And one other one I'll just cover quickly here. Optimal attention to the teaching of this yoga throughout our lives depends on prior attention to the movements and prompts of our own bodies, minds, and hearts. Listen within. Be listening here. Here, your guts I'm pointing to. Inwardly or in your own subjective space. And be seated there so that you can be taking in what is being communicated from without in the most auspicious way. And that's one of the primary key points in the gateway called listening, in the Human Sun teachings of Waking Down and Mutuality. So for the final portion of this presentation, and I welcome those of you who are interested to bring up questions about this for the conversation that we'll do sometime hence, 10 or 12 days from when I'm making this presentation. I just want to read a few pieces from a very important essay that helps, I hope, helps us ground our understanding of the white-hot yoga of the heart and waking down in mutuality. The whole range of teachings that have originated from this one. There's another teaching called the Tantra of Trust. It's a different languaging. One that I did recently that incorporates these fundamental principles into a traditional context is Christing 2.0. There could be other formulations I may come up with. Others will come up with other formulations. Something has started here that isn't available elsewhere that makes it important for you to develop discernment in relation to what has come elsewhere, and that will help you, I believe, if your testing of my words yields true faith, a fundamental confidence that fundamentally they're true for you, even if you don't necessarily agree with every word I say. I'm not asking you to. Gives us a picture. So here's the picture I'm wanting to point to. And in this book, The Incarnation of Mutuality, I referred to it then as the white-hot way of mutuality. I'm going to read with the name of the teaching that I came back to, the white-hot yoga of the heart. So I'll replace that here. The white-hot yoga of the heart is not hypermasculine liberation from the wheel of birth and death, but rather harmonizing liberation into the wheel of birth and death, leading eventually, and I'd have to add here, maybe, who knows, to ecstatic liberation of the wheel of birth and death itself. And I begin by talking about how in the white-hot yoga of the heart, that was where I first introduced the concept hypermasculine. Later in Waking Down, I recorded a more complete critical consideration of our passage from the previous hyperfeminine phase of our cultural development. I also outlined the distinguishing characteristics of the hypermasculine epoch and our potential to grow beyond both of these relatively imbalanced dynamics of individual and collective participation in life. And I talk about how hypermasculinity developed in two basic directions, either to control and manipulate or to dissociate and liberate itself from conditional and especially material or materially based phenomena, the body, mind, soul, and its various relations, or it seeks to achieve a combination of both effects. You can tell I'm not going to have enough time to go into this. I'm going to summarize it. And I'll do some recitations of it either in the conversation or elsewhere, because it's important to address more fully. There's a great transition that's been underway for quite some time. Out of the worldview that I characterize as the spirit-matter split. In order to understand that worldview, it's very important to go deeper than assuming that it's about how we do things. Yeah, in some ways that's true. But it's more fundamentally founded in how we are being. The great teachings of the East that we consider to be about enlightenment were all based on, emerging from, and classically developed the capacity to presumably liberate us from this wheel of birth and death. In other words, the event of being, in so many of these traditions coming out of India especially, being subjected again and again to cycles of birth, growth, development, also suffering, sickness, eventually old age, and dying, and cycling back again and again. And this is a very different perspective from that. And it's also a very, very different approach from that's the classically Eastern approach, the classically Western approach, control and manipulation. To bend material nature especially, and all of nature, to our will and to our needs, our wants. The white-hot yoga of the heart is fundamentally different from either of those approaches. And it, I believe, has not only the capacity, but because it has the capacity, it has, I feel, the obligation, the calling, the destiny, if you want to use a bigger and more confident word, but who knows what's going to eventuate. Depends, among other things, on what we all do in relation to all this in our own time. It has the calling, I feel the obligation, and I hope the destiny to become, for many, many, many human beings, a harmonizing way of liberation, not merely in a confining way, in fact not. A liberation into the flux and flow of all phenomenal changing events, the psychophysical realities of the world and the worlds. To be completely here and fully transcendent here at the same time, without the transcendence being in a different place up somewhere or deep, deep inside the heart, and you have to go in there and sit like a stone in order for it to be true of you. That's not what we're talking about. But this white heat, as I've been babbling from day one, and bless his great heart, Adida babbled somewhat similarly about the bhava. It's not just a subjective thing happening inside human souls and psyches, or roots of consciousness. The fact of it taking place in us is tending to intrinsically transform all that is. So it's potentially a liberation of the wheel of birth and death itself. With that, I close.